And away we go.
Yay!
Okay. So we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it? Discuss the sequence of lessons that surround this one lesson.
Okay, this was an introductory lesson about electricity in the middle of a unit that covers electricity and magnetism. The students need an understanding of how electricity and magnetism can be transformed, and they've completed the section of the unit where they've explored magnetism. We didn't follow the traditional sequence in going into electromagnetism prior to discovering electricity strategically, because we actually wanted them to have the background of both ideas prior to putting them together, electromagnetism. In previous years, the way the science kit that we've used and followed for years, they've done that in a different sequence. This year, we're starting to adjust the lessons and try it in a different format.
Excellent. Is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of texts designed to build skills and knowledge? If so, please give examples of other texts that form this sequence.
Well, the use of text in science class has changed dramatically with the Common Core standards and the new the framework for science. The framework for science has really highlighted the ability for students to obtain and communicate and evaluate information as one of the main practices of science. Historically, in the last 10 years or so, the concept of inquiry-based science has been the prevalent model where students are building concepts through exploring and interacting with materials, asking questions, and that sort of thing. And the text would come secondary to sort of backfill. We're working with text as the primary entry point into the content to give the students the academic vocabulary so that when they do the hands-on piece, they're actually using the correct vocabulary in place. And we found that to be very, very effective. So in terms of a sequence of texts, the difficulty with the shifts in curriculum is we're still working under the Connecticut Science Standards, and we're still working with the materials that we were purchased 10 years ago when the framework came out. The materials that are available in science are not at the Lexile level. The shift hasn't been made at the publishers because the publishers are waiting for the next generation of science standards to be approved. The topics will shift within grade levels, and then the new materials need to match. One of the biggest difficulties I had with preparing for this lesson is matching the Lexile level and the complexity level called for in the Common Core with the science content available in the texts that are out there currently. An example being with electricity, you're looking at, if I want to push into the 700 to 900 band in Lexiles called for in the Common Core at 4th grade, the concepts in text about electricity involve electrons, protons, neutrons, which is not introduced in the Connecticut Science Standards until 6th to 8th grade. So there's a real disconnect, which makes finding a sequence of texts that are at the appropriate Lexile level difficult. I found it is important to start stockpiling texts that are addressing the content regardless of the Lexile level, because when the students are taught to access at this young age the science content, instead of being more of a traditional telling approach, they become much more sophisticated and able to apply those ideas to the concepts as they're doing the hands-on inquiry piece. So the materials at this point are hard to come by, that directly target at the right level, but we are working on building those resources.
Excellent. Yeah, and I was wondering where the text comes from.
Yeah.
All right. So, talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
Okay. What I wanted in the lesson is the students to really be referring back to the text with the key details about electricity as they began to build an understanding of the concepts and the terms that they would need to use when they did the hands-on piece. The next lesson in this particular sequence is when the students are given the light bulb and the wire and the battery and asked to make the light bulb glow, essentially. That's always been the introductory lesson. So traditionally, the students were doing it, but they didn't have the vocabulary to just really describe accurately what they were doing. So I found by sort of introducing a concept with a text that gives the academic vocabulary in terms of battery, energy source, circuit, electric current, load, all of those things. When the students actually do the hands-on piece, they're now using that vocabulary, and I can address their use of it and misconceptions when they've got their hands on the materials. It's much more difficult when the students to correct those misconceptions when the students have already done the hands-on, they've moved into the text, and they've got a mismatch. They don't understand how those words are used correctly. It's a lot more difficult to fix what they have basically underscored as their current concept on it. So the intent of that lesson, getting them to really understand and use the academic vocabulary, but not by lecture, not by me telling them what these terms are, but them really digging into the text and developing that concept themselves and then testing it against the hands-on piece. I think that lesson structure within science is highly effective at getting at the core, the Common Core, but also getting at the science standards.
Excellent. By the way, they're gonna love your answers.
Oh
They're
boy.
very concise, which is great.
Oh, good.
A lot of the interviews are tough to listen to, so this is going good. Going well, excuse me. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies, and why?
I think the indicators that are best exemplified in this lesson are having the kids in the text the whole time. It was difficult. The students really are, this is the area of weakness for them. They're not used to science being presented in this way. They're not used to having to uncover their own knowledge, and they're not really used to having to put together scientific concepts through text. It's been historically much more teacher-driven, and I will tell you, so the perseverance was difficult for them, which is intentional for me. There's only one way to learn how to do it, is really struggle through it. And so the indicators of having students really in the text, really looking at the structure, even if maybe they don't want to. They want to move on to lighting up that battery, the fun part, but really having them understand and struggle and come up with why the author does specific things to help them. Becoming more comfortable with that, they will learn to transfer that to other scientific texts and use that skill repeatedly to build their own knowledge in the future.
All right. Moving on to the next section.
Yes.
We are interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instruction. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Okay. First of all, a science lesson that starts out with a complex text. I need that right there. That's a huge shift for science. As I mentioned before, usually we start with the hands-on and then we might build into some text. But the use of text or textbooks in science almost became a dirty word for a while. And I think the scientific community and the academic community realizes how important it is that kids really understand how to get information out of scientific texts independently. So that is a huge shift, just starting with text. The other shift is really understanding the academic vocabulary before going into the hands-on piece, as I had mentioned. Not giving the kids the ability to make up their own terms or come up with common everyday terms to describe what they're seeing, but actually giving them the language so that when they discover or experience a phenomenon, they're using the language appropriately, and you can address it right in that moment if it's not happening. You can address those misconceptions. It also becomes a formative assessment because you can assess, do they have the understanding of the concept, or are they applying it inappropriately? And that allows you to plan future lessons to either strengthen the conception or address a misconception with that academic language. So bringing that language to the forefront before moving in is really critical.
Excellent. did you teach the content of this lesson or this text prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
Okay. As I'd mentioned, years past, we would start with an open inquiry. We would give them the light bulb, the battery, the bulb, and we would have them light it up. They would have that discovery. They would be making observations in their own language in terms of common terms students would use. They would not be directed to use the accurate scientific vocabulary. That would be taught later. That is the major difference between how we're approaching it now and how we would approach it in previous years. As these lessons build upon one another, by having the text and the hands-on, when we're now asking students to make generalizations, we're asking them to pull ideas and evidence from two sources, both what they've read and what they've experienced. That's a huge shift, and by having both of those equally weighted in the science classroom, you're teaching kids that they need multiple sources of information, and you're teaching them to look at both as equal and valued places to find evidence.
Excellent. All right, we're on to the next section. Student engagement is critical to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensure that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did you support all students in working with grade level text? Do you provide scaffolding for students below grade level so they can read grade level text? How did you create opportunities for students who are advanced to engage more deeply with grade level and above grade level text?
Okay, in this particular lesson, when I looked at the student data, the text that matched the scientific content the students needed was below the Lexile levels called for in the CCSS. However, the complexity of the text and the structure of the text, I think, increased that text. That didn't make any sense. Let me try that again.
Sure.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, so when I thought about supporting students, the first thing I did is look at their data and looked at their NWA scores and their ability to read at what Lexile level. The text I selected and was for this particular assignment was below the Lexile level for the grade level and well within the reach of all the students in the classroom. However, the structure of the text made it more complex. When looking at that text, I noted the author's use of a mental model to explain a difficult scientific concept. I knew that that would be something that the kids would not necessarily know how to engage with. So when thinking about differentiating, my differentiating strategies were really more of a whole class because I knew most of them would struggle with it. And even the students that read at the higher levels, the more advanced levels, in this particular model, in the lesson, they had difficulty understanding the purpose of an author including that mental model. They had not really worked with that type of structure before. So the supports in the classroom of having partners be able to talk, be able to discuss their ideas in a turn and talk before they shared them out, having the physical model to represent what they were reading, having them actually step through those instructions and make the string create the closed circuit was a critical piece. The differentiation was I knew which students may struggle with that piece, and I was sure to go and talk with those students and make sure they were following the steps, because their tendency would be to just gloss over it and not really work through mentally what the author was telling them. So I worked with those students and made sure that they understood the connection between the text and what the author was calling for them to do to understand the scientific concept behind it.
All right. You good? Do you want to take a little break? Do you feel good?
No, I'm good.
Excellent. All right. How do you know the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision? Did students acquire the literacy skills addressed in the lesson? What did you do for the students who did not acquire the literacy skills addressed in this lesson?
Okay. I did not get as far in the lesson as I had liked I would have liked to. I had, the next task was to actually do more text-dependent questions to break down the third section of the text and have them understand how the structure of the text differed from up above. That the author was now using paragraphs to describe discrete pieces of information about the electrical circuit. So my written feedback from them where I was going to wanted them to do a graphic organizer would be now in the next lesson, where they would determine what were the key points about each of those terms the author wanted you to understand, and also what examples did the author give to help you understand. My evidence of their understanding in this particular lesson was their ability to make the connection between the mental model and the actual string physical model, that they had the aha moment of a circuit is a closed pathway, that it needs to be a closed pathway for electricity to flow. And then at the end, when I questioned them about, okay, so let's think about those different examples of places electricity is transformed. I'd given them multiple pictures to kind of connect the big idea of things that they would be familiar with and understand. Okay, we know that it works, but how does it work? And so by asking them, I apologize.
Sounds good.
That's my pick up my daughter alarm. So, where was I? Okay, so my evidence of having them be able to make the connection between how the author structured that mental model and how it helped them understand the pathway of electricity around a closed circuit was my evidence of their understanding. They were able to pull out the details the author used to explain it, and then they were able to apply it to thinking about objects that they couldn't necessarily see inside, but they knew now that they understand that electricity has a closed pathway, that within that object there must be connections. The pieces, whatever's in there, must be connected, and that if it no longer works, when I pose the question, say, okay, this no longer works, what has happened? They were able to identify and apply that concept that there was a connection that had been broken, or something was no longer connected, the pathway was now open. So that would be for this particular lesson, and as far as they got, my assessment of their understanding of the term circuit.
All right. 3 more left. Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson? What actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
Okay. Okay. The majority of the class persisted with trying to understand what was going on in that article, really understand the key ideas, the big ideas about electricity. When I looked at their student work and took a peek at their annotations, I had noted that 15 out of the 20 students were actually able to pull out the key ideas throughout the entire text. I noted that the places where they were circling words that they didn't know were appropriate. They were identifying words such as particles, which are key words for them to understand the concepts that were within the article, that they did need to know that. There are students that continue to struggle with persistence and really persevering within a text. I noted that in the classroom. However, with structure, with teacher support, they were able to cite a place in the text. They noticed a key idea. They were able to participate in some of the conversations. The habit of citing the text, being able to tell where in the text that you found that, is a habit of the majority of the students in the classroom. There are certainly students that are developing that skill, and I think the more opportunities they have the expectation is built in that they will have a moment to collect their thoughts, and the accountability piece of you collect your thoughts, jot them down, and then you turn and talk and share. Those opportunities will continue to build their comfort level with sharing their thoughts. It will build their accountability to doing the work. I think it's difficult for students in science class because it's not the normal way of getting science information. They're used to having the more difficult concepts broken down for them, explained to them, versus I'm going to teach you how to break them down and explain them to yourself. So, we're definitely seeing some difficulty shifting to that mode, but everybody's coming along. So I think that the type of lesson within science class, doing many, many more lessons like this, introducing this is how you just learn science at every grade level, will really continue to move kids along that continuum and make them feel more comfortable with persevering, make them feel like they can get to the other side, that they have the tools to understand what they read, even if it's new and abstract, such as electricity. So.
Excellent.
Yep.
Do you need to take a quick
Hang
moment?
on.
Sure.
1 second, yes. Hello?
This is an appointment reminder call from Dr. Columura at the Oncology
Gee, thanks.
Oncology Office, 95 Locust Avenue, Danbury, Connecticut, of Western Connecticut.
Okay, sorry.
Oh,
I never get this many phone calls in a day. So, okay.
all right. That was good. So,
Do I make sense? I'm like,
No,
I'm so
absolutely.
bleary-eyed right now.
No, that's perfect.
It's been a really interesting process doing this for science.
Yeah.
It's because it's different. You know what I mean? Like, because you're teaching the science,
Yeah.
but you're teaching how to access scientific information. So
We don't have a lot of science lessons down either, so it's
No.
nice to have them.
I don't know if that one's going to be, because I don't know if it's running, but there was a moment where I definitely switched into, this isn't the videotaping, this is staying with this kid and not letting him give up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, in a perfect world that wouldn't happen, but it is what it is. They needed that lesson, and we stayed with it until I felt more comfortable that they were really solidly getting it.
That was the
So
one in the corner.
a couple of them.
Yeah. Certain
So.
kids, it's hard to get them to
Yeah.
focus in.
Yeah, and you want to get to the battery in the bulb. That's way
Yeah.
more fun. I want to get to the battery in the bulb. But so it's a shift in understanding how to get information, and they're used to waiting for it. Eventually, she'll give it to me. Nope.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Excellent. All right. So reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well, and what might have you done differently?
Okay. I think the first thing I would change is the expectation. I had expected them to move a little bit quicker through the text. I noted right away during the annotation phase that they need to work with nonfiction text within science and social studies more frequently to understand that, paragraph structure signals new idea change, that we should be cueing in on something in each piece. So I think, in the planning of it, I wouldn't have reached it quite as far as I did in my expectations. I was particularly happy with the use of the visuals to start off, because I think it's really important to give kids, especially when you're dealing with an abstract idea of how electricity works, really concrete examples for them to kind of hang their hat on and start the lesson with a level of comfort. And I was very, very happy with how quickly some of the students were reaching to that higher level of the objects that were not so obvious in terms of electricity transforming. One child was able to pick up the light bulb and was really thinking about the fact the light bulb gives off heat and light. I had expected that kind of leap later down the road in this unit. So I think the use of the visuals to start off with is highly effective, and it helps them to continue to connect back to the big idea in the entire unit about transformation, because I think it's very easy to get lost in the details of these units, that it's really just about circuits or a battery, and that's not what it is. It's getting those kids to understand those bigger ideas. So I was very happy with that piece. I was extremely happy with the text itself, because it was hard. It was hard for the kids. And that's what I wanted. They need to learn something new about reading a scientific text every time they have one in front of them so that they can practice and grow their skills. I also liked the structure of the text, that the first part was difficult for them, but they were able to understand the second part of the structure, where it was more of a traditional just, list of parts of a circuit. They understood that completely. They were able, when I'm looking at their notes, they identified the key parts were that circuits have 3 parts, that identifying what each one of those parts was important, they could pull those details out of the text. So I felt like the text was a very good choice for where these students were at as far as scientists and readers, and I would definitely use it again in the future.
Excellent. Was there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors?
I was a little surprised at some of the students that, although they're able to read at that level based on the assessment results, that they were more reluctant in a science text. That the science text kind of threw them a little bit. That was a big surprise for me, and it just indicates that they just need a better or more frequent use of science text that is difficult, that requires them to reach, so they become more comfortable with it. I feel very strongly that every one of them in the classroom could have made the leap. I think some of them they're just not, they don't feel confident. So practice over time builds confidence. So that was my big surprise.
All right. Well, that's it.
Okay.
That was an excellent interview.
I don't know about that, but
No, that was great.
say it to everybody.